Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to the Business Innovators Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Brown. My guest today is communications expert Neil Gordon. Neil works with business influencers and thought leaders to help them develop and improve their communication skills. He's been successful in helping his clients get six-figure book advances, to be seen on shows like Ellen and Dr. Oz, and in doubling their speaking fees. Prior to establishing his own communications agency, Neil served on the editorial staff of Penguin Random House Publishing, where he worked extensively with New York Times best-selling authors. He has ghostwritten or collaborated on books published by Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Hay House, a bunch of very well-known publishing houses, and has been published in multiple languages all around the world, in addition to being featured on NBC, Forbes, Inc., and the Irish Times. And Neil joins us today to share the secret sauce, if you will, that sets influencers apart from everyone else seeking to have an impact on their audience. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Rick.
You've had, by all measures, a pretty successful career in the publishing industry. What motivated you to establish your own agency?
I had a very brief time in the corporate setting around working for Penguin. This is before they merged with Random House. And I was a relatively low-level book editor and working with New York Times bestselling authors. It was a totally legitimate situation going on, but I just found that I was noticing certain patterns in what paid publishing and communication professionals were doing that was really falling short, at least in my estimation, of what was possible for writing a book or communicating about an idea. Even just an editor giving a presentation to the sales force in order to get the sales force riled up. And there were just so many missed opportunities around communication that even though I was making almost no money and I didn't have a nest egg or savings or whatever, I just left the job that so many other people in the publishing world would covet, an editorial job, right? And I just struck out on my own, not even fully knowing what vision I had, but I just knew had to be a better way. And so that wound up being how I got started. In very, very modest context, I might add, Rick.
Well, and that's okay because you did it. And so many people have ideas and then don't actually get out there and at least try to make it happen. And one of the big things that you focus on, and we talked about this a bit earlier, and that kind of caught my attention, was your work in helping business leaders speak from the stage. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course. As I just described, my background was in book publishing for so long, and so much of my work working for myself early on was in collaborating on books and whatnot. But because of the way I started to approach working with people on their books, and because I started to be more foundational, it wasn't just writing a few tips and tricks on the page. It was a matter of getting to the essence of what any given author was trying to offer to their readers. I started to see, again, some patterns in what made the best-selling nonfiction books so effective. And then I started to see the same patterns in the TED speakers that were getting the most views on the TED website. And as I started to see this more and more and more, I realized that I could potentially start helping the very people who are coming to me for book writing services to help them on stage, and possibly even help them in far less time, because a speech is much less labor intensive than writing an 80,000 word book. So some of my book clients, I just did a little bit of work with them on what they could do with their speaking. And it was really an experiment, Rick. I didn't know if the concepts that I was talking about on the page would make sense on the stage. And then they would go and do what I told them to do, or take my guidance and feedback on how to create the speech. And they had such ridiculous results that I said, "Oh, what's that?" And of course, that's when I realized that there was a real opportunity to help people in much less time with what they did on stage. And so some experimental marketing around solving that problem for people, it took off right away. And here we are.
Any reluctance on those folks who were kind of moving from the publishing piece of it, from writing into jumping on the stage?
What I would say, Rick, is that early on, I might not have been very effective as a marketer in convincing people. But when I would get a referral and we would have a discovery call, I would build a lot of trust. And then when they got the results that they got from working with me on the page, I built enough trust with them that they were willing to take some risks, because working with me on speaking is a departure from what people typically do on stage. And as such, there is going to be some risk, but I'm happy to say that generally they trusted me enough to do that. I would say that the problem that they had wasn't so much trusting me as a collaborator. It was more that they already had a speaking opportunity in place, and their pain wasn't around their work with me. It was around, what am I going to do there? And just having me, even just as the closest warm body to help them, was going to really be what served them the most. And so I was happy that I didn't have to really do too much to convince them or persuade them to listen to me at that point.
Yeah, that's good, because I know I find a lot of times that people like the idea of getting help with their communication skills, but a lot of people also don't think that they need the help. And there's a gray area there where folks don't realize they need the help until after they've crashed and burned or something,
right,
of that nature. So what do you see? Let's talk first about what you see a lot of speakers doing prior to coming to you and implementing what you share. We'll get to that in a second, but I'm just curious kind of what you see some of the biggest mistakes are that speakers are making.
I really like that question, because to me, at least, Rick, the mistakes are completely glaring, but they typically don't realize they're making these things as a mistake. And if I had to distill it down to one essential mistake, when we're dealing with speakers, we're dealing with experts. These are people who have immersed themselves in some area, some topic, like for decades. And what I find they almost always, in fact, I would say that every single expert and would-be speaker who comes to me, every single one of them made the mistake of thinking that their job on stage was to provide as much information to their audience as possible. That the more information they provide, the more value they provide. And this is a terrible mistake. It's a huge error, because we're in the information age. We have so much information available even in our pocket with our smartphones now. We have never needed to work less hard at getting information. Whether it's good information or not, we at least have a place to go with that. And so if someone's showing up in a room, maybe it's a conference, maybe it's a lunch and learn, and there's effort, there's steps to go through to go and listen to a live speaker. And all that speaker is able to do is just provide even more information than they already have, then they've missed a huge opportunity to connect with their audience and convince them that there's more work to be done with that speaker. Whether it's buying their book or working with them or donating to their cause or whatever it is that a speaker would want to do to be of influence. And so the thing that when we think about why a person gets up and goes to an event and sits in a room among a bunch of strangers and looks up at a stage for 20, 45 minutes or an hour, what have you, what they're ultimately looking for isn't information. They're looking for change. I went to a PR conference a couple of weeks ago in New York, and every one of us who was there wasn't interested in information. If it's a PR conference, we're interested in what? Getting media placements, getting the word out about our work. We want outcomes. We are not getting those placements yet, and we want those placements. And so that's why we're there. And so what the typical speaker will do is they'll get up on stage, they'll provide 7 steps or 5 tips, or just do that drinking through the fire hose kind of thing, where it's like, here's all the stuff you need to know about this thing and all of that. And for me, when I see one of those type of drink through the fire hose presentations, I just get overwhelmed. I just get daunted by all the work that I now need to do. What I need by the end of that presentation is the belief that change is possible. Because once I have that belief that change is possible, that's when I'm empowered to make the changes that the speaker is suggesting. People are empowered not by that which they know is true, not by knowledge, not by all the things they need to do, but rather that which they believe is possible, that they can do it. And so what I wind up doing with the people who come to me is I work with them to completely transform everything basically they do, including starting with something more emotionally compelling and then building up to something climactic and impactful so that people have these aha moments and they suddenly realize what they've been doing wrong this whole time. And now, because they realize how much better they can do things now that they've heard this big aha idea, then they believe change is possible and then move forward and probably convert to something else like buying a service or buying a book or something like that.
Sure. I should have asked you this a little bit earlier, but who is your ideal client? What kind of people do you find yourself working with? Obviously speakers, but can you kind of hone that in and help others identify if that's a good fit for them?
Of course. I find that the people who respond best and get the best results with my particular approach to speaking are the people who have an unconventional idea about how to create change or solve a problem. And there might be, like, your work is in PR and communications and marketing and whatnot, and you want to get up on stage. If you see the rest of the PR landscape, for example, doing PR one way and you see it as heavily flawed and you really want to take some risks with your clients and your people to go in a different direction, that everyone else is out there doing this and instead I want you to do this, then that's the ideal person for me to work with, because you're needing to really, in this way, you're needing to, when you're busting conventional wisdom, you really need to persuade people of a different idea. And most people, when they try to persuade, use manipulative, even slimy tactics that you need a shower afterwards when you hear it. And that's what people associate with influence, is that it's this slimy thing. But if there is a way that you could persuade with heart to really give someone something of tremendous value and build trust around that value and make them want, not make them, but compel them, I should say, to want to go deeper, that's persuasion. And so what people who have unconventional ideas struggle with is busting those myths. But this process is designed to do exactly that.
I had a mentor years ago who always used to say, when other people zig, you got to zag. So that's kind of what you're saying there exactly. As well. So kind of without getting too deep into it, how do we go about doing that? As you mentioned, there, everybody's got the world of information in their pocket and in their hand these days. So what is it that we're trying to do then if we're not presenting all that information?
Right. It's a great question and absolutely critical to this approach to speaking. There's something, when I described earlier that I had noticed certain patterns in the best-selling nonfiction books and the best TED Talks and whatnot, what I noticed is that there's this one technique that happens in 46 of the 50 most popular TED Talks and in these best-selling books. And even if you looked up ancient content by people like Aristotle and in The Art of War, you see this pattern again. And it's what I call a silver bullet. It's a certain kind of sentence that when you engineer this sentence in a precise and predictable way, people have these aha moments. And it's often difficult to quantify. I mean, when you look up Aristotle, you'll find like half of the most popular quotes on Brainy Quote wind up being this silver bullet-like sentence. But I actually like to use a far more modern example to demonstrate the impact. And it's in a New York Times bestselling book that came out about 5 or 7 years ago called Creativity, Inc. And it's by a man named Ed Catmull. He's the co-founder of Pixar. And what Ed was charged with doing with this book is explaining what it was about Pixar that made it not only so commercially successful with its movies, but also so critically acclaimed. How could they take, and at the time he wrote the book, they were working on Inside Out, which is the Pixar movie about all the emotion characters in the little girl's brain. And it's this really outlandish idea. How do you turn brain concepts and emotions into a viable children's movie? And what he described was about a quarter of the way into the book, he said something that, you know how in a Kindle, like you can highlight passages and it aggregates it. And so if like a lot of people highlight a certain thing, it'll tell you that.
Right.
So last time I looked at Creativity Inc., 6,500 people had highlighted this one sentence. And what he said was, getting the team right is the necessary precursor to getting the ideas right. And this sentence was highlighted 6,500 times. And that winds up being what we call Ed's silver bullet. It was a one-sentence recipe that explains the entirety of the Pixar culture as a single thought. The reason why people highlighted it so many times is because they felt empowered just by reading that one sentence. They didn't need to read the rest of the book. All they needed to read was that one sentence. And it was a thing that started making the light bulb go off. It's like, that's right. We've just been focusing on the ideas this whole time. But what if we put more time into figuring out how to make the team work? And, we could do this and we could do that. I mean, obviously, they're going to want to get Ed's advice beyond that one sentence. But that one sentence became so powerful, and it got highlighted 6,500 times because people were able to form ideas without any other context. So to circle back to your original question about how do we create this belief that change is possible? How do we create a different kind of content than this information dump? We can actually use the model around storytelling, like movies, like, the Avengers movies and the Infinity War and Endgame was the sequel, and it shattered every box office record because there was this enormous cliffhanger at the end of the first movie. And so billions of dollars in box office tallied later, people showed up for Endgame because they wanted to know how it ended. They wanted to know what happened. And so what I have my clients do is very deliberately draw their audiences in emotionally at the beginning, and then very slowly build to this big aha moment, this climax that's revealed through the silver bullet. So you might plant mystery early on in your talk and build up this thing that, like, how could this be a thing? And the trick with mysteries is that if you don't deliver on the mystery, then it's going to be a letdown. So the silver bullet provides that aha moment, which really provides a climactic experience. So you start not revealing the solution early on, but rather the problem. How do you solve it? How do you solve it? How do you solve it? And then the silver bullet, like Ed Catmull's example or any number of other examples, provides that aha moment. They feel nourished and fulfilled by your solution, and then you have a tremendous amount of trust.
And it provides that place or that moment of connection, I think, right, between the speaker and their audience. So as you're saying this, and I'm thinking back to when I read a book and I've got my highlighter out, and I'm one of these people that I prefer to have the hard copy with my highlighter and pen so I can make notes, and I'll find a passage or a sentence or something where I just go, wow, like, that's deep, man. Let me highlight that, and I can go back to it again and again and look at it. And I think that's exactly what you're describing, because just something that resonates with me as the reader or with the speaker and their audience that I think creates that connection. And we all talk about creating a connection with our audience.
Yeah. And it's really a great point, Rick, because it's like, I might specifically and strategically have them build up to that one idea, but it doesn't mean that a silver bullet in another context isn't also tremendously powerful. To mention that PR conference I just went to a couple of weeks ago again, you know how when you're at a conference and someone's giving a presentation with the PowerPoint and somebody puts a slide up and everyone wants to take their phones out and take a picture of the slide, right?
Yeah.
What will often happen at this and other conferences I've been to is somebody will put one of their favorite quotes by some famous person up on the screen.
Obligatory, isn't it?
Yeah, right, exactly. And I would say, Rick, I mean, in this conference and in general, I'd say that at least 80 or 90% of those quotes that are put up on the screen are a silver bullet, and all the cameras, all the phone cameras come out and they're like taking the pictures and all of that. And it's just like, and I'm just sitting there like, kind of like, I got this half smirk on my face and I'm kind of nodding to myself. I know what's happening right now. Yeah. So it's just really funny how it's just such an overlooked technique, and yet it just time and time again is just so clearly empowering its audience when people see it.
And as you mentioned earlier, this is something that you've seen in a large majority of the successful TED Talks, right? Right.
And we could even, off the cuff, Simon Sinek has, I believe his TEDx talk is still the most famous most viewed TEDx talk. And he very famously says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And he says it 6 times in his talk. That's his silver bullet. And Dan Pink has got one of my favorite TED Talks, and he did it from the main TED stage. And this is a number of years ago now. And he says the secret to high performance is not rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter.
Say that again. Say that again.
Yeah, sure. So his whole thing is the puzzle of motivation. That's the name of the talk. And how do you motivate your workforce? And it's not carrots and sticks, right? He says the secret to high performance is not rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter, right? And then the most famous TED talk is Ken Robinson's. He's gotten the most views. I think he's north of 50 million as of our conversation. And his silver bullet is our only hope for the future is to see our creative capacities for the richness they are. And I can give you as many as you want, right? I mean, one after another, after another, after another. And it's just there time and time again.
Yeah.
And it's just such a valuable and critical thing. And it also winds up helping my clients to have tremendous confidence in their value. So one client of mine was getting help on a talk and we worked out his silver bullet. And a couple of days later, he wound up making a couple of $30,000 deals like right away, just because he had so much confidence in his value, because his silver bullet was so top of mind for him. So
I'm curious, does this, what you're talking about, well, and we've kind of related it so far to talking from the stage, but does that carry over into any kind of marketing for your brand and yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good question. What I've found is there isn't really a limit necessarily to the context in which this particular content can find. It's not a tagline. And that's something I often have to educate people on, is that people think because it's a concise statement that it's good to put it front and center. So it's not necessarily the thing you package your brand with, but if you have, let's say, a funnel and you're sending them to a webinar to buy into a product or services, or a video sales letter, in a similar way that you might build to a silver bullet in a speech, you can also build to a silver bullet in your online automated content, or even if it's a live webinar. You can build a curiosity around how do you solve this problem that you want to solve, and then you reveal the silver bullet, and that builds a lot of trust. So a lot of people who watch my video sales letter, for example, wind up becoming customers and getting a program that I have on how to create a signature talk, because they have that kind of trust, right? And it winds up being a valuable thing to do. And even a content marketing approach winds up being a way to utilize a silver bullet. If you have a 3 or 5 minute video, or if you have an 800-word article, you can distill that whole body, that short body of content, down to its own little mini silver bullet. So it's to really emphasize the point of it, right? And so it winds up being a way to do a lot of different forms of persuasive communication, but again, not in a way that makes people feel like they need a shower afterwards or that they feel manipulated. It's a matter of providing real intrinsic value and trust, knowing that if they want to go deeper, there is an opportunity to, but they don't have to. People could be listening to our conversation and feel satiated, or they could want to go deeper. It's just a matter of providing as much value as possible from as earnest of a place as possible.
Sure. Well, help our audience understand what it is they will get out of working with you.
Oh, well, thank you for that question. When people work with me one-on-one, what I do is I do a deep dive immersion into their world and the way that they go about solving their audience's problem in a unique way. And then we find a basic flow for their talk. It's a structure. It's often an outline it starts with an outline of maybe between 20 and 25 bullet points. Here's where you do this. Here's where you tell that story. Here's where you solve this problem, that sort of thing. And then we work out the nuances of the language, how to actually express that outline, and then we work out some of the nuances of delivery. Because when working with me, I put a tremendous amount of emphasis not just on what you say, but also how you say it. And so if you're going to be getting up there and planting a mystery and not revealing it till later on, a really pregnant pause, for example, could be tremendously impactful in making sure that the audience stays with you, because you are taking a risk. And so with greater risk comes a greater responsibility for curating your audience's experience. So we have these various phases, and by the end of it, you have a signature talk that you feel you understand why you're saying what you're saying and the way you're saying it. And then you're able to go out there and not necessarily, if you have anxiety as a speaker, it won't necessarily completely eradicate it, but having that ownership of your value and what you're going to say to represent that value can really help to assuage your fear around getting up in front of people.
And for somebody who's interested in working with somebody like you, what do you think is perhaps the most important question they can ask themselves?
Well, I'd say there's two levels to that. It's one question is working with a coach in general, and then the other one is working with me specifically. And working in general, the question I would ask specifically in the context of speaking is, when I'm up there, are people looking at me or are they looking at their phones and checking out? And are people coming up to me afterwards and wanting to go deeper? And when they express interest at the end and wanting to go deeper, do they actually go deeper?
And I think that's what a speaker is really shooting for.
Right. I mean, obviously there are different, if someone's a TED speaker, they're more likely just to be presenting, they're actually asked just to present the idea and not try to do any sort of conversion at the end. That's
Sure.
very much not what the TED culture is about. But let's put that aside. If you're speaking at a conference, you are probably looking for leads, or you are looking to sell your books or what have you. And so are you selling out your books? Are people watching you when you're speaking, or are they tuning out? Are they on their phones? Are they just politely clapping at the end? Or is there that greatness, that swell of, oh my God, that was amazing at the end? And so if you don't have those things, then that's the point where it'd be worth it, at the very least, to get some sort of course, or possibly even one-on-one or group training support around it. Around me specifically, again, to come back to the whole thing, if you are struggling to persuade people of an idea that is going against the grain a bit, or even a lot, around how people typically solve a problem, that's when you really want to look at my process specifically, because it's very much driven. I'm not going to tell you to come up with an acronym for your 45-minute keynote and then teach them each of the 7 steps of your acronym. It's going to be, here's the idea, and here's how to persuade them of the value of that idea by the end of your speaking, so that they can then send them your acronym through your book or through a 5-day immersion course or whatever it is. But the stage is more like the introduction of a book, and then your stuff is more like the meat of the book itself.
That's some great information, Neil. I appreciate you sharing that. I'd like to switch gears just a little bit here before we let you go. You familiar with the Proust questionnaire?
I'm sorry, the what?
The Proust questionnaire. So Marcel Proust was a French writer.
Oh, the author, yeah.
Back in the 1900s. And he had a series of questions, and I'm not going to throw all of them at you, just a couple of them. But he believed that answering these questions, an individual reveals his or her true self. They're pretty harmless questions, really. And you really just need to answer with the first thing that comes to your mind, and you can pass on any of it if you like. You game?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So here's the first one. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Oh, wow. My idea of perfect happiness is, all right, I'm going to go big on this one, Rick. My idea of perfect happiness is a curiosity-driven conversation with a beautiful woman.
All right. What's your greatest fear?
My greatest fear is that I'm going to live a completely typical life.
Good. What is your greatest extravagance?
Oh, wow. I am a minimalist by nature. And so I would have to say, that's a tough one. I would say that I have an affinity for breakfast foods. And I've probably spent much more money on breakfast food I live in Santa Monica, California, and brunch is very expensive. Santa Monica. So why don't we say brunch? Simple answer. Brunch is my extravagance.
You don't want to narrow this down to a specific food product?
I mean, honestly, Rick, we got the eggs, we got the pancakes, the French toast, the waffles, crepes every once in a while. I'm open to a good crepe. I mean, there's just something about it. And then the tea, the green tea that comes with it, it's just perfection. I might have to modify my greatest happiness answer, actually, now that I'm thinking about breakfast food again.
I'm looking at you right now, and like, you are in that space right now, man. I can see that you can see the food.
I'm so happy right now because I'm thinking about eggs. I don't know what's wrong with me, Rick.
That's awesome. What is the quality you most like in a person?
Oh, I love curiosity. That does circle back to my earlier question. I love a person who is asking a question not because they're socially obligated to, but because they honestly want to know the answer.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
I feel that I have created the concepts and the process that I have, not because someone taught it to me, but because I figured it out on my own and have done so with very little mentorship. I do recommend mentorship, and I'm grateful for those who have come up in later on in life, but I was off doing this on my own and figuring it out, and I took it seriously and I persevered through it. And the fact that I did so autodidactically is really something that fills me up.
We talked about, you mentioned rather that you live in Santa Monica, California. And I think during our earlier conversation, you mentioned something about New York. Mm-hmm. So we'll end with this question. Where would you most like to live?
I would say, honestly, Rick, I still haven't figured out the LA, New York toss-up, because I just cherish both places very much. And so am I allowed to say that in the perfect world, I spend 5 months of the year in New York and 6-7 months out of the year in LA, and just kind of split, like hedge my bets? And does that work as an answer? Because that's the dream.
Yeah, I think that works. And we're talking about spending the sunny months in LA.
Well, basically, we're looking really granular here, Rick, because I've thought about this a great deal, as you'll soon find out. From mid-April until mid-June, I would want to be in New York. And then from early September to the end of October, I would be in New York, and then a couple of weeks around the holidays. So maybe it's about 4.5 months in New York, if we're going to be really precise. And then around the holidays in New York, because it's the holidays, and who doesn't love New York in the holidays?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So 4.5 months in New York, and then the remaining time in LA.
Okay, I think that works. I think Proust would approve of that response. Thanks for that. Neil, how can our listeners find out more about working with you and getting clear on their silver bullet?
Yeah, well, you can certainly find me at neilcanhelp.com, and you can go right to the training that I offer on the video that I talked about earlier. As a good example of marketing that incorporates the silver bullet, you can go to neilcanhelp.com/silver bullet to go directly to that. But either way, you can get that training pretty easily from my site.
Neil Gordon, content coach, speaker, communications expert, and innovator. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today, Neil. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it very much as well, Rick. I had a great time.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Business Innovators Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Brown. Until next time, keep innovating.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.